Well, hello, everyone. So good to see you. Thank you for being a part of this journey. It's Thursday, and I think that we're going to have a lot of fun today, folks. I have been so looking forward to having the guest we have on today for quite some time. And hey, here's a word for everybody. Um, Patience has its reward. If you just let it flow, the energies and the circumstances will come. So today I have the honor and really the joy of having Miss Penny Kelly on today. Penny, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. Hello to everyone out there. It's good to be here.
Such a delight to have you. And thank you, everyone in the chat room, all the moderators, and speaking favor over all of us. Nothing missing, nothing broken. I say that every time.
Very good.
It's the definition of perfection. If there's
Yep.
nothing missing, nothing broken.
Nope.
Yeah. So
It is
anyway,
as it should be.
exactly. I like that. So much love, everybody. So many of Malanka and so many of you. Clever Gypsy. I love that. That's cool. That's a cool handle. I like that. So Penny, I first actually met you and our good friend writer, and that was on the 100 show, and then we rendezvoused back for the 200th show, and to see writers' growth is just, it's inspiring. That's all I got to say.
Yes. I was honored to be there.
It was,
and it was good conversation.
It was definitely, it had a lot of gnosis, to deep gnosis on that, and wow, I mean, it tells me that we're in a place in the timeline that I think if we could have a step back and we're able to look down at it and say, wow, is this really a time to be here? And your journey, and because we were talking before we went live that we are the baby boomer generation, would you say? Yeah.
It's a great generation.
It is. It is.
And I'm an early baby boomer. So
yeah,
older than most people on the web doing this kind of thing. So
that is something that within itself.
Yeah.
Because you and I were talking how when I was born, when you were born, reality was shaped a whole lot different.
Oh, yeah.
And you were talking about the challenges of being a woman.
Yeah. Yeah. I know the whole plan for a woman back then was grow up, get married, have children, and live happily ever after. That was the plan. And so it was with this great shock that I gradually, I had this dream of going to college. And so I grew up, had the children, got married, did the whole, like, okay, let's get that done. And then the dream of going to college cost me everything. That was not something that anybody in my family supported, including the extended family on both sides. And that was just my dream. It was like, oh my gosh, I have to do this. It cost me a lot. I paid the price. And I came out on the other end, really glad that I had done that. But in the process, while everybody else was in the 60s and I'm having babies and married to a computer programmer who became a Detroit cop, that whole process was really I was really very strict and very rigid back then. And
does that go for your thinking as well?
Oh, my thinking was, yeah. I mean, I had the attitude of, look at those wild things out there, those hippies, what are they doing? Shame on and it was only later that I realized, wow, it's a good thing I was married and having babies, because I would have been right out there with the SDS and the Chicago 7 and, whoever else was.
Woodstock, no doubt.
Yeah, and I actually got to know Larry Plumunden, who was known as Pun Plumunden. He was part of the group that blew up an office in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and then became on the top 10 most wanted FBI list, and ran for 10 years and hid and et cetera. He eventually ended up living not too far from me, and got to know him. And he was very, very clear about who he was. And I so appreciated that. And I said to him at one point, Larry, why were you so upset and so angry? He said, because we could see what was happening. We could see the game that was being played. And I said, what made you think you could have an impact? And you know what he said? The music. He said
The
the
music.
music that was coming out was so inspiring. It was so powerful. And I thought, oh, wow, you were going to base changing the world on music? But that was the case. And they were all working together, but they were naive. Everybody in the hippie movement was naive. So the way that I see it now, that movement started in the 60s, and we're going to finish it now in the late 25s, late 20s. So, yeah.
You know, I've never talked about this with any guest, but I think this is totally the right place. And he talked about the music.
Yeah.
And in my writings and muses, you know, one of the things, because music defines who I am, it really does. It's, you know,
I was
I
going to
learned.
be an opera singer.
See,
So I trained for opera.
wow, and that is trained in the classical sense. And
Right.
that's, you know, I was in the classical band, played the clarinet, played the bassoon.
Yeah.
So when I seen this thing come on, and it's interesting because when we harnessed electricity, you know, electricity is part of the ethereal. It
Yeah.
is, in fact, where consciousness will ride upon. And when we harnessed that mastery and we incorporated it into this thing called music, and then when we were able to make an electric guitar,
Yeah.
that the first chord that had to come off the first electric guitar had to send a shockwave through the ethereal realm.
I know.
I mean, I do believe this because it was a tone, it was a frequency, it was a harmony that had not been heard before. If it had, it'd been long since forgotten.
Mm-hmm. That's true. And we had all sorts of projection equipment, speakers. You could fiddle with the sound. You could give it some echo. You could give it a depth. There was a lot you could do with sound. We thought there was a lot. There was not, compared to now. But that whole thing really moved an entire generation, opened up their soul. And
Yeah.
that's the power of sound right there. In its most basic, music is, you know, each one of us is music. When they talk about the music of the soul, you'll occasionally in a meditative state, you can hear your own frequencies, and they sound like the most beautiful classical music piece. The harmonies are exquisite. The melody is entrancing. It's stunning. Very few people hear their own sound, but they're beautiful. They're beautiful.
Yeah, and it's amazing because I was having a flashback because that era for me was an awakening. It took me to grow through most of my life to find my youth. And because as I look, and I think you can relate to that.
I do. Oh.
And, you know, here we sit and we have brilliant people. So many in the chat room. Thank you, by the way, folks. I've left Penny's information down in the information box. I hope all the links work. But if you haven't subscribed, go over there and subscribe. Check her out on her website, pennykelly.com, because you'll read Penny has one of the most fascinating journeys. And again, here you and I sit. I look back for myself, how much a consciousness awakening I was immersed into and didn't even realize what was going on.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't. every generation thinks, oh, this is how it's always been. This is how it's supposed to be. And they don't really start looking around and, comparing. It's one of the things that we do in education is contrast and compare until much later in life. And then we go, oh, I missed it.
I mean, so I
God,
don't know if you know much of my past, but when I was on the
no, I
streets in
don't.
Houston, Texas,
Oh,
I began taking LSD, and I was there was a organization called TRIMS, the Texas Research of Mental Science. I was a group of teenagers. That's all we were, and we were given clinical LSD, and then we were
wow.
observed and had a number of that's why I learned meditation and transcendental meditation.
Yep.
Uh, and as I look back now, I realized how much my consciousness was being open in areas that has followed me all of my life, and it's
Yeah,
curious.
that's right.
You had a very you were Catholic, as I understand.
Yeah.
um, you had this journey, and I have to introduce you to my wife because the two of you would really relate, because she came from the same family environment where girls were not going to go to college.
No.
You got out of high school, you were to find and marry your high school sweetheart, and he was going to work in a factory, and that was about life.
You capsulized that perfectly.
So the two of you would
Oh,
really get along very well.
yeah.
So here you go in a marriage, children, um, a husband that's, as you said, was a computer program, then became involved in law enforcement, a cop. Um, wow, the when you look at the diversity, the
Yeah.
duality of that, how'd you navigate that?
Not very well. In fact, not very well at all. He became a cop because that was his dream. And eventually, he kept talking about that. We were married for 7 years. And it came to the point where I realized I did not want to be married to a cop, but I couldn't stand in the way of his dream. So I began to support that dream and mentioned one night at supper that I thought he should go and apply at the Michigan State Police. The next morning, he called me and said, I'm down here at the police and I've applied and I'm going to take a test. And I'm like, aren't you going to work? And was like, that was like a shot of permission that he was waiting for his whole life. And so that, I watched that whole process. He became a cop. We moved to Detroit because you had to live in the city. And that then put me that much closer to Wayne State University. And I began to realize, not really consciously, but at an unconscious level, if he could go after his dream, why couldn't I go after mine? And that cost me the whole marriage. That he
Oh,
did not want a woman who was educated more than he was. It became very violent. And finally, I said, this has to end. We need to grow up. And so we split, and I was apart on my own for about 9 or 10 years. And then actually fell in love for the first time. And that's what triggered the Kundalini awakening that changed everything. So in the meantime, I had gone to school. I loved it. Oh my gosh, I loved it. I could have been a perpetual student. I am a perpetual student,
yeah,
but
aren't we
just not
all?
associated with with a university. So, and then after Kundalini occurred, I was at that point so unable to manage keeping myself in the box. You cannot live in a way that's not in alignment with who you really are once you become aware of that. And when you make a decision that goes against what you are and what you came here to do and what you know and your truth, et cetera, then you have all sorts of, you attract all sorts of what I'll call negative energies, weirdo beings. You have nightmares, you have all kinds of problems that occur that you're creating and you don't realize it. But one of the gifts of Kundalini is that I could see. And I still can. And that I could see light of a different quality. I could see beings. I could see to the end of the universe. That first 3 years was absolutely mind-boggling. It was terrifying.
What
And
triggered that, may I ask? I mean, the Kundalini, because you said it was not a pleasant experience.
it was kind of pleasant in that I was in the middle of making love.
Well,
But
there is that.
so there's that. But then after that first 2 times, then it started to happen all by itself. And, it didn't matter where I was and or what I was doing. I could be talking to somebody, I could be enjoying that conversation, and all of a sudden I would see the lights begin to change, everything got brighter. I would hear this massive rumbling sound. It would feel like there was an earthquake happening because you would shake. They would shake from inside. And I later learned that that shaking is one of the signs of a shaman in the making, is what the Africans called it. That's one of their indicators that we have a real shaman here. I did not know that then, and so I was just terrified. And so, and then you would have this orgasm in the brain and black out, and it was embarrassing. It was just totally embarrassing. It eventually calmed down. It starts up now and then all by itself. And it usually starts up in response to, I'm going to say, any moment that I totally immerse myself in a place of unconditional existence, total openness to the energies of the source or the soup. I call it the soup, or whatever. It can be a moment of music. It can be a moment of watching something that is absolutely, I'm going to say, has a critical truth for us as human beings. And I recognize that it can be, just a moment in nature, a moment of quiet meditation. I tell people I don't meditate anymore. It's too dangerous. But I have learned to manage that quite a bit. And once in a while, I will meditate. I try to make every step the meditation, every breath. So,
And
you
did that
see it?
help you write your books? That you're an author of 11, right?
Yeah, yeah. I
Wow.
actually, I wrote the first book, The Evolving Human, thinking, oh my gosh, what if there's somebody else out there struggling with this same thing and wants to know, is there anybody else out there dealing with this? Because it's an energy that you cannot control. It controls you, and you have to go with that. And you cannot, it's not there's nothing trite or small about it. I've had people who have called me from all over the world. Please help. I'm on the edge of suicide. I'm like, just hold still, get quiet. That's an intelligent energy. It knows where it's going. It knows what it's unfolding. Stop fighting it. Let it take you where it's going to take you. You have a purpose. This isn't a natural thing. It's how we're supposed to unfold. And it is the next stage of human development. And people, we don't know that. The majority, the mass of people do not know that. They think we're all done, all grown up.
That's, I tell people, youth is a process of stages. I
It
mean,
is. It is. And I outline those stages in The Evolving Human. There's 1 or 2 more stages that are not in the book that I discovered after I wrote that. But back in the day, my family had long lives. And I remember hearing my grandmother and my great grandfather talk. He was 101, and I think she was like 80 something. Okay. something like that. And they were talking about second childhood. And back in that day, second childhood was the renewal of the human body in a way that brought you into your wisdom, your power, and your grace. However, nobody was navigating that. They were all ending up with dementia and unable to figure out who they were, where they were, and so they went down. And I remembered those conversations just the other day. I only heard a couple of them, but that struck me as, okay, that's what the second childhood is for. This stage of life is for when you take everything that you have learned along the way and you put it together and you develop yourself another stage or two until you become an eternal being. And we're just not navigating that. We don't know that. We're not doing that. Everybody's falling apart. And so I tell people, you have to be doing some deep detox and some deep renewal by the time you're 55. Start, even if you're starting at 65, doesn't matter. Just start, because the renewal is amazing. And and you keep going, and you don't age as fast. You don't, you have to stay with your time. You have to keep learning. People get lazy. So we have an opportunity here to develop to another stage, and we're not enough people are aware of that yet. So
I'd agree with you. It's interesting you were talking, because I was smiling, because in my meditative moments, I just go out and, just open myself up to what the energy, because living now where I live, there's energy everywhere. But
I know
it's interesting. I was walking, and it's interesting because I said, I recognize where I am in this time and in this space.
yeah.
I'm very much aware, Penny, that before me lies the transition.
Cool.
I'm really looking forward to it. And I have this profound gratitude. It brings tears to this physical being, but it's a profound gratitude to be able to have experienced what I've been able to experience and come out on this end younger than what I am when I went in.
That's right. That's right. That's what's supposed to happen. How did, my grandparents and great grandparents know about that? What has been lost? This was, I remember Grandpa was 101 when he died. He died shortly after that conversation. I'm trying to remember how old I might have been, but I was young enough to be paying attention. I was always interested in what the adults around me were saying. It was it was the way that life was for all of us. My grandma had 14 children, so there were a lot of people around. And I had
It's
a
a
lot
family.
of cousins. Yeah, it was huge. It was huge. And I forget how many first cousins, something like 68 or 63 or something like that. And then the bigger family was of 500 people. So the
Is that
extended
family structure still in place? I mean, I grew up with my grandparents. Yes.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
Good.
And every few years we all get together. We have to rent a hall. We rent a golf course. We rent a park for the day. We hire a DJ. We dance. I mean, it's like getting to know everybody who's been born, talk about who left, who's doing what, who's married to who's leaving who. It's a big family affair. And
So what would
that
you say your family has evolved into now? Because that's a very large family that has the exponentiality that continues to expand out.
Yeah, it does. I'm not sure how to answer that question, what we've evolved into. We've always been a community of our own. We haven't had to worry about, I'm the only one in the family. I can't even imagine what that's like. because those 14 children that grandma had grew up and had anywhere from, 6 to 12 of their own.
Yeah.
And so we have a built-in community. It was a way of understanding or getting the inside view of everything that had to do with the saints and the sinners and the black sheeps and the the gender issues that came up and the alcoholism and the who was beating their wife and who was really good and who was, doing what and what did everybody think about that. It was an amazing training or education all in itself. And the family was very, very tolerant of all of those things. It was like, that's them. We're doing this, mind your business. That was kind of the attitude. And you tolerated everybody and everything. You dealt with who you dealt with, and that was it.
Wow. If we can only replicate that,
I agree.
it would just be, interesting.
Yeah.
So a curious question, because one of the things I like to ask, particularly people who come out of a religious background, whether you want to call it indoctrination, beliefs, or whatever, Catholicism, long-lived belief system, influenced virtually every religion known today to a degree.
Yeah.
How deeply were you involved, and how did you reconcile yourself when you became awakened, I guess is the best thing to say to it?
Okay, I was deeply, deeply involved. Okay. I went to church every Sunday. I was, even after I was married, I was involved in what they called the Christian Family Movement group. And we read epistles, at the church services. I sang, there were all kinds of, sometimes we had dinners, we put on plays, all kinds of things. When the awakening happened, the aha was, OMG, that religion is nothing but bare bones. There's no meat on those bones. All of a sudden, I understood what the church was trying to say, but they didn't want to say it because they didn't want anybody to reach their own power. I could see the beginnings of the church. It was not good. It was definitely not good. They were, in their day, they were the ISIS terrorists of their day, trying to get things going. And then, they eventually they got into power. They immediately began to squash other people in their power. They just continued murdering, etc., until they had a degree of respectability. In the first few years of Kundalini, I stopped going to church altogether because I really couldn't go anywhere. I hid in my house for a couple of years because I couldn't manage my perception. It was all over the place, and I would find myself in some other time or in two places at once and think, wait, what happened to that other place? Wait, there were all kinds of perceptual difficulties. And so I stopped going to church. In the meantime, I began to understand what the religion was about, all religions, same thing. It was about becoming a really highly advanced being of love and light, and one who had the ability to work their own miracles for themselves or others. And, I've had a number of miracles that we've seen in our family. That miracle thing is true. There was just all kinds of awakening to the truth. I had already read the Bible 3 times by the time I was in my middle teens. And so I went back to that and looked at that and realized this is really just a wonderful history of the Hebrews, who then were picked up by the Jews, became, the whole thing, just became a story of the Jewish family. They claim it. I'm not sure that that any of it, you can say it's the word of God. But when you realize, when you have a full-blown Kundalini experience and you realize that we're all made of this God stuff, the stuff that we refer to as God is not, God is not a person out there or even a humanoid form. It's a field of intelligence that shapes the individuals into, billions of different arrangements so that each one is unique. And that makes us each a budding god or goddess in our own right. And yes, we collect our wisdom. We have wisdom stories and teachings, and that's what the Bible is. It's a whole collection of stories of wisdom that have some timeless truths in them, as well as a lot of history. And so at that point, I thought, okay, this whole story, I've become really pretty good with what I call the language of energy. And so I can read Genesis as a completely different language, telling a completely different story that has some of the history embedded in it. And that it just broadens your perspective, that awakening process. And when I hear people out there saying, well, they're awakened or they're woke, I'm like, oh no, those woke guys, they ain't woke at all.
They're
That's
just turning over in the bed.
yeah, right. And the awakening has just barely touched the surface for a lot of people. I see now that what we're caught up in this day and time is a planetary awakening. Kundalini does not have to begin with a spiritual thing, a meditative thing, making love. It can be something that is a knock your socks off piece of information that rocks you to the core. And when you first feel that, it opens you, and that crack, that's the crack in the cosmic egg. That crack begins to expand, and now other information pours in, and people are like, oh, I can't deal with this, and my world is falling apart. Yeah, that's a Kundalini happening on a national scale in the United States right now. And we are in the midst of some of that craziness. We're about to get into it much deeper here over the next year and a half. And that, just hang on. Just hang on. One of the things that awakening does is wipe away the old life, the old world. A new world, a new way of living has to be developed. And if I can do it, anybody can do it. So on a national scale, I think we are almost at the first turning point of that awakening. That's something I just posted. I think it's up now on my Patreon site. That we are in the midst of a full-blown awakening. There's no way to go back. So, and the way forward, it's messy. But while the gifts, I list some of the gifts that come as a result of allowing that to finish its progress or its trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, when we were talking before we went live, it's like, we're going to finish what we started back in the 60s. And I'm saying we as if I was part of that thing in the 60s, and I wasn't. I was very late to the party. It was 1978, 79.
Yeah, you were, but you made it, so that's a good thing. I mean, you arrived.
Yeah.
It's amazing as you were talking because it allows the reflection of one's path. And for myself, there has always been what you would call this spiritual aspect. Even as a kid on the street, it was there. And all my life, you were talking as well with the Catholics. I remember when the charismatic movement moved through the Catholic Church and then subsequently into the Protestant Church. And I remember there was a big festival in the town I was living in at the time in St. Louis, where it was the purpose of bringing both Catholic and Protestant together. And as I view that now, it wasn't so much a religious experience as it was to me an opening of thought that
Wow.
these walls were coming down.
That's right.
My walk in religion with Christianity has always been on the side of the gifts of the Holy Spirit, Pentecostal, evangelical. Kenneth Copeland, Kenneth Hagin were the peoples of mentors of my life. I always knew about wealth, that wealth is rightfully mine, no matter what economic status I'm in, it's there.
That's right.
I learned that the supernatural exists. I can still speak in tongues. I can still interpret. I was anointed with oil and have the gift of the seeing into the spirit realm.
Yeah.
I look at those modalities today. I had those before I went through that experience, so I still have them now.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't really lose anything. What
Mm-mm.
happens as you awaken is you expand and you gain all sorts of capacities, all kinds of insights, all kinds of knowings. That's just part of the process. To stay in the box is a terrible mistake. You end up not getting very far. And then you leave here and realize, oh, I can only advance if I'm in a body. So you come back and you try it again and you start over. And the first 20 years is almost always wasted because you're relearning everything you had at one point in a previous life. And
Yeah.
it's a slow process. So,
I sense such discipline in your mind. You remind me of another person who I knew in my lifetime, Joyce Myers. Knew
oh,
Joyce in the very early days as she started her women's ministry. And the thing about Joyce Myers that I remember, she's extremely disciplined mentally. She
oh,
went through the abusive marriage, the whole bit. And I think she was Catholic as well.
yeah,
But the thing about Joyce that I always remember, she always believed that what she spoke would come to pass.
yeah.
And I remember the early days at the church, I was, because I ran the bookstore. So I sold her tapes. When the women came in on Tuesday mornings, we would duplicate the tapes. But she came in to me one day and she said, I'm going to have the largest women's ministry in the world.
Oh, wow.
And I said, okay. And she said, stop and look at me. She says, you don't understand. I am going to have the largest women's ministry in the world, and
Yeah.
went out the door. She
I love
did.
it. Okay, now that's ballsy. And that's true. And
She did. Yeah.
yeah, it became her reality.
Well, her
Yeah,
bestseller was the battlefield of the mind.
yeah, yeah.
If you take the
Well,
religion out of it, go ahead. I'm sorry, dear.
no, go ahead. Finish what you were going to
Well, I
say.
was just going to say, if you take the religiousness out of the book, it is probably one of the biggest self-help books you can ever find. It is a mental exercise
Yeah.
to train your mind to stay focused and to let all the other white noise, as she called it, let it simply die down.
Amen.
So
Yes.
anyway,
Yeah. You have to have that focus if you want stuff to happen the way it needs to happen. And so it's really that's such an important piece. The emotional side of things, um, let me just say this, that, I used to teach classes here at my farm, live classes. Now I teach online. But there was somebody here and I remember them following me after class was over. They didn't go back to their room and they said, I'm so angry. How do I get rid of my anger? I turned around, I said, don't you dare get rid of that anger. That's your emotional juice. You just nurture that. Don't make it any worse. Don't blame, don't all this, but hang on to that feeling. And when you really want something to happen, You would have the thought and then you marry it to that intense emotion and boom, something's going to happen. And she said afterwards, you know, this was like a year or so later, that was the secret for me to stop feeling bad about what I was feeling. It was, she began to realize that that emotion of anger was change energy. And when she wanted something to change, she could use it to make something change. And I think we don't realize that we are such milk toast creatures. We have all these weak, wibbly thoughts, and we don't put any power behind it. We have to feel. It has to, we have to be adamant. This is, you know, I need this. I've got to have this. And instead we try to, the teaching recently, which I've so tried to educate people away from, is that they should get rid of their ego. And all the ego is a bunch of feeling. And so they end up putting all that feeling somewhere where they can't access it, and then they have no power. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. The ego is to watch and to protect you. Don't, when you become totally present to everything, the ego falls naturally to the background. You don't have to get rid of the ego and all of that emotion. I mean, if it's selfishness, that's one thing. If it's meanness, yeah, you need to fix that. If it's a need for vengeance, you need to stop that. You need to go back to the root of whatever that event was that caused you to want vengeance or, you know, or be mean or get back to the root of that and ask yourself, why did I decide that that was okay? What did I think that would get me? Why, you know, and usually it's, we were hurt. We were hurt and we wanted to project that hurt. And that's the root of most vengeance or meanness or selfishness. You know, somebody does.
Would you say people lack, you know, when I ran my company, and Monday mornings would be the general staff meeting. So we would come in, and the thing that I would tell my employees and even my senior staff was that if you can't identify what your passion is, then you'll be rudderless.
That's
You
right.
have to have passion.
You know what? I'm glad you brought that up because that is the number one rule of evolution. You have to follow your own heart. There's all kinds of other things out there, but the number one is follow your heart. The reason is, so I had somebody once who said, well, you know, what if my heart says I want my neighbor's wife? And I said, yeah, follow that. Because you're going to come to a point where you either have the neighbor's wife and say, oh, this was a terrible mistake, or you have the neighbor's wife and you realize that she brings out something in you that no one else has brought out that needed to come out in order for you to progress along the path, or you needed to develop your own ethic. Ethics has to be something within you, not imposed from outside in, but coming from inside out. No, that's not the way I want to be. That's not how I want to see myself. And so you adopt an ethic that says, you know, I'm not interested in my neighbor's wife. I'm not interested in, you know, this or that or whatever. Following your passion teaches you all of the lessons that you, specifically you, need in order to evolve your consciousness and expand into higher states of being. You can't get there following all the others' rules. It's just that simple.
My wife tells me the only mistress in my life, she says, is your desire for knowledge.
Well, yeah.
She says, I can't compete with that.
I know. No, she can't. And that's really the mistress that each one of us should have. The
Yeah.
desire to know thyself right to the core. And all the other experiences that finally get us there are valid, they're necessary, they can't be substituted for. So yeah, follow your heart.
So Penny, how would you define consciousness? It's one of those things that
Yeah.
I think about a lot, is that I'm aware of who I am, but I'm also aware that I have a thought. And the question last night, as I was drifting off to the either world, was, am I thinking my own original thoughts, or am I merely speaking the thought of myself or something higher? How would you define consciousness?
Consciousness is the reflection upon the core feeling within.
Ooh,
Consciousness arises from the soup. Okay, when you have a full-blown Kundalini experience, for instance, you the person you disappears. You have no awareness that you exist or ever did. There's no past, there's no future, there's no present, there's no dog, no spouse, no house payment, no neighbor to deal with, no job. There's nothing. There never was and never will be. That's the state of source. And the only thing, the only thought, if you will, the only knowing or feeling in that state is I am.
hmm,
And that is so profoundly satisfying that you don't think, you don't go anywhere else because you're completely filled. And it's absolutely silent. It's absolutely still. There's not a thing moving. You can see to the, ends of the
hmm,
cosmos. So you're in this I am state, and I've been back and forth enough times that I see the process. So there's this absolute utter stillness, and then there's this vibration that begins. And that vibration is the waves of that thought, I am. However, it breaks up into all kinds of frequencies. And frequencies are actually little spirals. They start big at one end and they spiral down to a little tiny point at which there's a bing, a flash of light. And when you watch that process happen, you realize and you see the seething mass of frequencies that we are embedded within. You go from there to that little thing of light produces a particle, and those particles interact and they form patterns, and the patterns then form plasma. Plasma is the initial state of matter. And if the plasma holds and the pattern has enough I am consciousness and enough awareness to be able to organize itself into a functioning system, that could be a bird, a plane, a Superman, excuse me, then what you get, oh, I'm gonna get all frogged up here. What you get is all these different forms of matter, some of them actually interpenetrating, that exist in this massive soup. And they're the ones that are related harmonically are the ones that form a reality system. Hang on a second. So you end up realizing that consciousness is actually the energy of all of those spirals, all those wave frequencies. Each one brings a feeling. That feeling is what brings thought. Feeling is primary. Thought is secondary. It arises, and that's a very good question. Is this my thought or is this somebody else's thought? You have to go back to what am I feeling? And when you get to that point, you end up saying, okay, what am I knowing? Knowing and feeling are pretty much the same thing. Thinking is not knowing. Okay, thinking is a process of actually processing feeling and assigning a meaning to it. So you end up, asking yourself, is this my thought or is this somebody else's? I tell people when that happens, sit with that. Let that become yours for a while and you'll know. You'll know, yeah, this isn't me. I don't want anything to do with this, or let's go a little bit deeper, or know a little bit further, or where does this go? You follow that. There's lots and lots of options for us in terms of our development, and that's all part of that process of sifting through in order to know thyself. So,
As you talk, I'm reliving moments in my life. Again, I came out of this, the faith movement.
yeah,
And the thing that I know, for instance, um, Hebrews 11:1 has always been one that, from now as a philosopher and as a practicer of the arts, has aided me, because I understand it says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen.
yeah, exactly.
That's merely, go ahead, hon.
That's you got it. No, I don't keep going. Keep going.
What I learned in the spirit, and that's what I used to call it, because I've been used in the gift of seeing. And so I am. Now, there may be many trillions and trillions of I ams, but I am.
Yeah, that's your
So,
core.
yeah, it's right. And I can feel it at times. But what I was seeing in the spirit was this substance, and it's what you called coalescing energies and what have you. It's the same thing.
It is.
And it responds to what comes from my core when I speak, calling those things be not as though they are.
That's right.
So I learned from my former religion in that it was teaching me what we would call occultism, but it really was teaching me how things work.
Yeah, right.
So that's why I know I'm a God. I know I'm an eternal being.
Yeah,
And my journey here was the exercise of learning that which I've commanded before I ever incarnated into this existence.
bingo. Yeah, we set up our lives. We try to organize ourselves so that we'll follow a particular path that has all these wonderful insights, knowings, things that expand our being. And then we get down here, and of course, a lot of people throw the plan out the window. But if you
They
don't,
do.
yeah, they do.
They
If
do.
you don't do that and you follow your heart, you're going to run into some I'm going to say family, friends, peers, coworkers that really test you. They test you to the nth degree, and you have to continue to move forward, loving yourself, trusting yourself and where you're going and what you're doing, and loving them. And it's challenging. I will say that.
It is. And that's how you deal with the hurts. I mean, and we all have them. We all have inflicted upon, and we've all been recipient of. And and for myself, what I've learned is that the acceptance is that I have the ability to hurt others, and I have the ability to be hurt by others.
Yeah.
But that isn't a flaw. It's a reaction.
That's a reality. That's
Yes.
the vulnerability that you have to maintain is the condition that allows you to open. If you close, it's over.
I mean, I
So,
learned that lesson with my father, who's transcended over, but in the years of beatings after beatings, and I thought it at one time would really mess me up emotionally, but what I found is that the day that when I told him, I said, I forgave you a long time ago. I said, I don't even remember that. And that
yeah.
was the key for him, because he broke down.
Oh, I bet. Oh my gosh.
I mean, it was what a healing moment. And I believe it was at that moment that allowed his life to continue on as it did mine.
There you go. Yeah. And that's the
So,
gift when you forgive. It works in
yes,
all directions.
it
Yeah.
does. And the spirits, there are a group of energy beings that really dig that energy.
Yeah, that's true.
They really
Yeah.
do. I mean, there's others, as you know, experiencing violence yourself through a marriage. Lynn, my wife, in her first marriage, she experienced that.
Mm.
And,
That was
you know,
common. It's very common. It's still
yeah,
common. When I was down in South America a few years ago, that was the talk of the town, so to speak, was how do we get the men to stop beating the women? how do we get the husbands to stop beating the wives? And I was like, oh, wow, this is, I mean, it was everywhere down there. And I thought, okay, that's part of that old patriarchal model. And I, you know, that the wife could just be a something that you took out your frustrations on. And so that's something that I think is getting healed as we wake
Mm.
up a little bit more step by step. So,
I don't
yeah,
understand that. I mean, I understand the pent up anger, and
yeah.
yeah, I get it,
But the need
but
to beat somebody?
no,
No, no,
no, because I have to comfort that little boy that I am. I still have to comfort him in the moment of that trauma,
yeah,
and tell him it's going to be okay,
yep,
but what it came down to, and then this is put this out there, was that my father was carrying a guilt that existed before my birth.
eh, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, folks, I know what I'm talking about.
yeah,
And you see that transcended into episodes of violence, taking
yeah,
the anger out on the one that you in your heart are blaming,
yeah,
but at the same time, you can't seem to be able to forgive yourself. And then, of course, you have the outbursts of physical violence. And
yeah.
it's a spiritual thing. Now that I know, if I had the knowledge today, I could have broken that spirit. But, as a child, I was still evolving.
I know, I know. And we are, and we're
Yeah, we are.
very, very, we're tender little things.
Oh, we
One of the
are.
things I've said to people is let others know if they're hurting you. You can't
Yeah.
pretend that you're all tough and strong. You will have to ask somebody point blank, is that your intention is to hurt? They hurt me because it's working.
Yeah.
People are often like, no, I'm not. It's like, well, then what is it you want?
Um,
What are you trying to do?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Penny, we live in a day and age where this needs to be taught, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of hurting people, and there's a lot of
Oh,
people who can't. What you bring the gift to the world, and just, my time that I've known you, and I'm going to get more into your books, is that to me, you're giving people a roadmap.
I hope so.
Yeah. That's what I sense. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I came here with the express plan to teach the world, this is a quote, teach the world about the mind and consciousness, because that's our greatest tool, that's our greatest gift, that's our greatest power, and we don't use it and we don't understand it. And so how could we use it if we don't understand what you've got? It's like being given a leopard tank over in Ukraine, and everybody's saying, do you know how to use this thing? No. Oh, well, oops, they blew it up. Never mind. So
Haven't a clue, you know?
yeah,
Yeah.
right. So
Oh,
I hope, when I started writing, that was to teach at least one person, maybe this will be helpful to at least one person. And then other books came along. I've shared what I learned all along the way, the tests I've been through, the mistakes I've made. Oh my goodness. And I think one of the things that I would encourage people to have is tenacity. Don't give
yeah.
up. When I would start a new research project into consciousness, because I would hear people talking about something and think they don't know what they're talking about, and neither do I. And then, so I'm going to explore that. I'm going to research this myself, and nothing would happen for a whole year. So then I would renew that. Okay, I'm gonna stick to this. We'll do one more year. Nothing would happen for the second year. And then I think, okay, let's renew this for a third year, 3 strikes and out, 3 times. If nothing happens, I'm moving on to some other subject of interest. And whoa, the whole thing would blow open. And that really, is how we learn. It doesn't come instantly. There's things that I know instantly or can see because I've seen them before, or I've seen that pattern before. But when people say, how do you know the things you know? It's like, well, because I let stuff come to me. And I'll
Yeah.
ask the question, let it dangle. Answers start coming. I collect as many answers as I can, put those into a picture or a pattern. If there's pieces missing, I go back and say, well, what about this? Well, what about that? And that way I assemble the knowledge that I think we could all use, and then I share that. So
I'm glad of your tenacity, I have to tell you. Little side story on that. When I was in sales, I worked for a period of time for a technical writing company. There was a company down in Louisiana called Oceaneering. And I've been trying to get to the president of the company because we had something that his company needed, never could. And so finally one day I found a way to get to his secretary and called his direct line, and he picked up the phone and he said, "You have the tenacity of a bulldog." He says, "Man," he said, "You just don't know the word stop or no." And he said, and end up, I got a big contest anyway.
Very good.
Oh, Penny, you got to come back on.
I'd be happy to.
There's a kinship here. There is a, and it's a very gentle energy, and I would love to have you back on, and so we can talk more, because I think this is how we help each other. And what you've done, you're helping people right now. So I appreciate your gifting.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I hope, everybody hears something a little bit different. I've been an educator for many years now, and I'm really aware that the best way of going about anything is just dump a ton of information. And then, like my chickens, people will pick through that and pick out the one thing that they can hang on to, and, run off in the corner with, and try to eat before somebody takes it away from them. But that, that whole process is, we don't have to learn in a really highly structured manner. Bits and pieces, let the bits and pieces come in. They will all come together, and there'll be an aha moment somewhere down the road. So
I tell you what a gift. You want to tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, okay. I have a website. It's gonna go under some serious reconstruction here soon, but it's pennykelly.com, also known as consciousnessonfire.com. I have a Patreon. I'm on Rumble, YouTube, BitChute, all the podcasts. My books are available in PDF form on my website. You can download them there, or you can go to Amazon and get a physical book. Some people like physical books. So I tell people, start with the first one, Evolving Human, and work your way through, because they expand as I learned and grow. I learned and grew. So
Grown. Yeah.
yeah, as I learn and grow, I share more and more. So yeah, I just started I'm working on, I have a series called Consciousness and Energy, volume 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I'm working on volume 5, which is about becoming a body of light. So we'll see how that goes.
Fantastic. I love the energy. It is just beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. You have very good energy yourself.
Well, thank you, madam. It's been, as you sometimes you get calluses on your knees, because
yeah,
that's all I can say to that.
Well aware of that.
Oh, well, Penny, I just speak favor over you, abundance of prosperity. I'd love to have you back on. And folks, thank you all. The best thing you can do by showing her that is to make sure you subscribe and buy the books. I mean, that's the best way of saying, I really like you. And it's a good gift.
Watch out. You can't go back. You can't not know.
There is that problem. Once you go through the archway, you ain't gonna go back the other way.
Oh my, you don't know what you just said. Yeah, okay. Next time we'll start with the archway.
Okay. We'll do that. I like them. Now I'm curious.
Okay.
Thank you, Penny. Everybody, we will see you all tomorrow. Make the best of the day. It's your day, and that's the best way to go through. Much love to you all.